Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel today. Thank you for joining me for some more worm farming tutorials and information on vermiculture. I have an awesome video lined up for you today on why your worms may be trying to escape your bin, so stay tuned. Before we get started today, I just want to take a sec to thank everyone of you out there that's been supporting and watching my content. I'm really happy that you're getting some good information on worm farming and that you're enjoying my worm farming content. Thank you. So if your worms are trying to escape, there's usually a couple of common problems that are causing that issue. One of them is environmental issues, and the other one is the worm bin itself. So usually it's just one of these two issues that are causing your worms to want to escape, and that's what we're going to review right now. So one of the first things to look for when you're trying to decide why your worms are trying to escape is to make sure that you have the right type of worms. You don't want to have the wrong type of worms, because those are going to try to escape in the bin and in their habitat. Composting worms are the ones that are suited for like a worm bin to make compost. So if you're looking to make worm castings, you're going to need composting worms, usually red wigglers or tiger worms are sometimes referred to. I see a lot of people and they're essentially asking, can I go out and dig up the worms in my backyard? And you actually can't, because those are earthworms. They're a different type of worm from a composting worm, and they're not going to work out very well just because they're more of a burrowing type of worm that will go down deep in the soil. So those aren't the type of worms that you want to have in your bin, and they're going to try to escape if they're not the correct ones. Next is really important for a new worm farmer. This is something that I didn't know even myself when I started worming, and this actually happened to me. But when you have a new worm bin, a new batch of worms are more likely to wander or try to escape until they are used to their new home. Worms are kind of like bats and owls. They really don't like light. Keeping a light around the clock in the first couple of days will encourage the worms to burrow into their bedding. If your worms are escaping from the drainage holes in the bin, cover the holes with nylon stockings to block the passages while allowing air to circulate. Whatever you use to keep your worms from going out the bottom holes, make sure it's not toxic to the worms and will not break down easily. Luckily, this only happens for a few days. Once the worms get settled in, if everything else is good, they will stop trying to get out after a week has passed in the new bin. Another thing that could contribute to worms trying to escape, and is kind of related to the last one, is poor bin design. Poor bin design that doesn't have enough airflow or drainage could cause your worms to try to make a run for it. A lot of times, if you fill the bin with something that the worms don't like sometimes if you add white paper that's been bleached, they don't like that, and they're going to try to get away from that. So you always want to make sure that you're using a good bin, and you want to make sure that your bin has lots of airflow and drainage so you don't run into problems with the worms trying to escape because of that reason. So another thing for new wormers who are just starting out, when you're placing your bin in your house or your garage or wherever you decide to place that bin, you want to make sure that you're putting it into a fairly peaceful location. For example, you don't want to put it in somewhere where the worms are going to be feeling vibration all day long from like vehicles or heavy equipment. You don't want to open the bin every hour to check on their progress. You kind of want to leave the worms alone and let them get settled in. And if you're bothering them too much, they're going to want to try to escape, and that's going to be a big reason why they might be wanting to get out of your bin. So another big issue to cause your worms to want to leave sometimes is having too soggy a worm bin. Worms may try to escape from a soggy, wet environment. The bedding should be evenly moist. It shouldn't be too dry. It shouldn't be too wet. You don't want it to drip when you squeeze it. If the paper is really compacted, the worms may suffocate. If it's you've got a lot of food and a lot of bedding in there and you're putting any pressure on it, it's going to A, heat up, and it's B, going to be very compacted. So you want to try to stay away from that. If the wet bedding is a problem, like usually what I'll do is I'll take out all the extra wet and bedding and any excess food and liquid, and I'll usually just start with a brand new fresh bin. I'll fill it up with my regular stuff and get it back to normal, and that usually clears things up pretty quickly. So sometimes your bin can be overcrowded. This can cause the worms to want to leave. Since the worms can have like thousands of cocoons every month, they may be trying to get out because of overcrowding. There's good news about this though, is that the worms will self-regulate, meaning that they will stop having new cocoons till the overcrowding stops. You really don't have to do anything to fix this. If you want, you can maybe separate out some of your worms if it looks like there's a lot more worms in your bin than there's normally is. So you could take some out and put them in a separate bin with a temporary bedding in it and just get them back to a normal population. So our last reason is probably one of the most difficult to troubleshoot, and that's just because it's an unknown reason. Sometimes it's it's tough to figure out what this one is, and it's just maybe no logic whatsoever to why it's happening. Could be something as simple as the weather, some food that they don't even like. Could be some different food that you've given them and they're not used to it, just like when we go to the restaurant. Sometimes it just happens, and you just have to do your best to make sure everything is in control and correct in your bin. Otherwise, I haven't even heard of someone giving their worms peanut shells and forgetting that there was salt on them and had major worms trying to escape, and some of them even dying because of the salt. So it's just, you have to pay attention and make sure that you're aware of what's going on in the bin, and probably check on it maybe once a day just to make sure that your worms aren't trying to get out. So some things that you want to look for if you believe that your worms are trying to escape is, one thing that I've noticed is that the worms will all come to the top and go around the edge of the outside of the bin. A very heavy concentration of worms all along the rim of your bin, because they're basically trying to get out of the bedding and get out of the situation. They'll be crawling over the sides and they'll be dropping on the floor. There's a lot of things that they will do to try to get out of the bin. So you just have to be paying attention to what's going on, like the odd worm falling out of your bin or falling down into your leachate tray. That just happens. That's not the worms trying to escape. But if you notice any kind of like a difference where the worms are really getting like piled up somewhere, or it looks like they're trying to get out of the bin more than normal, that's usually a signal that there is an issue with your bin. So you want to make sure that you start checking through a lot of these things to try to clear up whatever condition is making them to do that. So if you find out that you've got one of these issues in your bin and your worms are trying to escape, there's one easy fix that you could do to keep your worms from getting out of the bin right away. And if you want to try to keep them in there to make sure you lose as little as possible before they start trying to get out, if you do have one of these issues, is to take a really bright light and place it over your bin. The worms really hate light. Keeping the light over them till you correct the issues causing them to leave will keep them in there till you can get everything back to normal. Or if you're new, or if it's a new bin and you're just setting it up and the worms are still getting adjusted and trying to escape, this is another great way to keep them in there until things start to settle down. So that's going to wrap up our video for today. If any of you got any comments that you'd like to leave about why something might have happened to your worm bin to cause your worms to try to escape, then please leave them down in the comments. It'd be great to hear any of the information that you can provide to help the community. If you enjoyed that video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notified bell. And I look forward to bringing you more content in the future. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.